Hey everybody, and welcome back to Demystifying DMing, the show where we talk about some DM tips. Today we're going to be talking about combat again. Like I mentioned in the last video, we're going to be taking 2 weeks to talk about combat. Last week was talking about planning combat, and today we're going to talk about running combat. Now again, this is talking about actually you're at the table, an initiative has been rolled, and you are running the game. What do you do? One thing I will recommend right off the bat is a good initiative tracking system. Make sure that you at least write down initiative, and one of my favorite ways to do it is write it down in a place where the players can see it. If you use a battle mat, write it down on the battle mat where they can all see it so that they can keep track of these things, so they know when they're coming up and they can start to plan accordingly, so you don't have to surprise them and be like, oh, and by the way, you're up. And they're like, huh, oh, whoa, what? Oh, I thought I went later. I guess I'm gonna cast a spell. Let me figure out which one. This way they know when they're coming up and they can be prepared and plan accordingly. When it comes to running combat, I feel like one of the most important things to make combat feel really fun is description. Describe things in more detail than just what's happening on the mat or with the rules. Especially if you're using theater of the mind combat, make sure you are being very, 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 even overly descriptive with these things. It can feel a little silly, but make sure that you're still describing these things for your players, going above and beyond just the basics of what's happening in the rules to describe the situation. There's a multitude of styles and ways to run combat. I'm going to talk about two in particular. The first one is gridded combat, which 4th edition D&D was pretty much based entirely on the idea of playing on a grid, either on a battle mat with minis, or if you're on Roll20 and using like a map there and little tokens, moving them around through squares. That is gridded combat. The other is theater of the mind, which uses either no or very little physical visual representation of the combat, and lives entirely in the realm of description and imagination. Both of these have their strengths and weaknesses. Gridded combat works great for very large and very complicated encounters. The human working mind can only hold a handful of things in it at a time. I think it's like 7 or 8, depending on the person, maybe 6. Which means that if there's more than like 10 things happening on the table the players need to be paying attention to, yeah, you probably want to pull out some minis. Theater of the mind can really do a great job of unshackling players from this very rigid gridded structure and start to think in 3 dimensions and in more creative, interesting ways that's not locked into gridded square by square movement. So like I said, both have their benefits and drawbacks. I'll kind of talk about both. But one of the most important tenets of Theater of the Mind combat that I think is very important in gridded combat as well is description. Definitely in Theater of the Mind, but I feel like also in gridded combat, you want to start every player's turn with a brief summary and description of what's going on and what's recently been happening. This helps frame things for them and put it into sort of that same context that they normally play the game in, so they can get more into their character's head and not kind of zoom out and think about it like a board game, which it looks like when you're using minis. If a player's turn starts with just looking down and seeing, the orc mini next to the wizard, they're going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, that's right. The orc is next to the wizard. Orc just attacked the wizard with an axe and did some damage. I should probably do something about that. But if you start their turn and describe it like, all right, fighter, you're up. The woods have recently come alive with orcs streaming out of the trees. Your wizard friend was standing there unawares when one came up and slashed at them with an axe, and blood stains their purple robes, and now that orc is menacingly standing over them, getting ready for another strike unless someone interrupts them. Wow. That feels a lot more urgent, a lot more immersive, and a lot more like the kind of thing where they're going to be thinking as their character and not thinking like they're playing an objective board game. It brings those feelings and those role-playing elements into it that aren't necessarily there if you're just looking at a grid. It also helps frame the situation for them and helps them remind them of what things are going on. And they might have forgotten that, oh, wow, right, I wasn't paying attention. I didn't notice there was an orc next to the wizard. That's something very urgent their character would take notice of that you're just kind of helping remind them of. Also, describing attacks can be really fun and can really add a lot of interesting elements for the players and make this more than just continual die rolls and numbers. Say, again, we go back to the wizard being attacked by the orc. As opposed to just, well, the orc rolls to attack, 14, does that beat your AC? Yeah, okay, you take 7 damage. That was very low energy, and how a lot of us tend to run combat. I will fall into it too, and it just tends to help it make things drag. If you want to make that more interesting, add description to it. Think about what's happening. Instead of just, the orc moves up to you, attacks, rolls a 14, does 7 damage, instead, describe that out. The orc turns and sees the puny wizard and realizes this is his chance. He charges at you with a battle cry. Roar! Coming at you, axe raised in the air. He swings down at you. Whoosh! 14 to hit. Does that beat your AC? It does. You try to throw your arms up in vain, but he bashes them aside before swinging the axe down, and it bites into your flesh, dealing 7 damage. All right, fighter, you just saw this. Your turn. What are you going to do? It's like there's a call to action in there. It's exciting. You can feel the fear of being the puny wizard with a massive orc charging at you with an axe. It brings them back into being their characters in this scenario, as opposed to letting everyone kind of detach and look at this from a third-party perspective over this game map. The energy you put into your voice also very much matters. As a teacher, I can tell you that vocal energy in a group of people is incredibly important. It has a huge effect. If you are using a lot of energy and speaking very, very quickly, it's going to create a sense of urgency with the players that's not there if you are taking a more laid-back, low-energy, slow approach. Now, I'm not saying you have to be like jumping up and down and super into it every single second, but try to have some energy, especially during combat. This is a life or death scenario. Try and reflect that in your voice and your tone, and your players will feel it, and it'll feel more exciting and more engaging. Lean into it and have fun. Be silly, be energetic, feel ridiculous. It's okay. Your players are not going to think you're stupid. Your players are going to thank you for making this more energetic and more entertaining for them and doing that little extra bit of theater. It might even encourage them to feel silly and describe things for themselves as well, and really also lean into it, and then everyone's just having a better time. Don't talk about combat like you're doing your taxes. If combat sounds like you're doing your taxes, it's not going to be as fun for anybody. Let it be exciting. Lean into it. Have some energy. Drink an extra bit of caffeine, sugar, energy drinks, whatever your pick-me-up is while you play D&D, and just go for it. Another thing with that, combat is not silent. People don't just stop talking in combat, but for us it's really easy to just let there be no dialogue through combat because combat and role-playing are completely separate, right? Wrong. Combat is an excellent place to bring in role-playing. If you're having your final confrontation with your big villain, you better bet that big villain better be cackling and monologuing and taunting the players and reminding them of past defeats and, shouting at them over past victories and tying in all this stuff together and reminding the players why they want to kill this evil lich. Dialogue in combat can be really easy to forget about, so if you want to jot yourself down a few things, a few lines ahead of time with your encounter prep, that can help you so you have some things to reference, and eventually you're going to get a natural back and forth. And don't be afraid to lean into tropes and very cliched things. Like, if the bandit chief says, "Get him!" That's something. It's not, it doesn't have to be an Oscar-winning dialogue here, as long as they're talking and saying things, or, 20 extra gold to the one that brings me that wizard's head after the wizard hits them with a fireball. Call these things out. It helps it feel more engaging. It helps it feel more interesting and adds that human element to it that really brings the role-playing into the combat and mixes the two together very well. Another thing, this is something that's hard to plan for, but easier to do in the moment when you're running encounters. Try and create decision points. In chess, there's something called a fork, which is a strategy where you get to a point where one piece is threatening 2 other pieces. Like, my knight can either take your bishop or your queen, and you need to decide, basically, do I save the bishop, do I save the queen, or do you just let me pick and do nothing? Or do you try and find another way out of the scenario so you can attack my knight and prevent this situation entirely? While D&D is not chess, those types of moments where you threaten 2 different things and force them to choose between 2 conflicting ideas creates wonderful, fantastic drama in the moment and will make your players that much more engaged, and it will create this just delicious moments of inner conflict and turmoil for them. And some of these you can plan for, some of them come up in the moment. Like, for example, say the wizard goes down and the cleric is there right next to the big villain and they're almost down, but the wizard is 1 second from death. Do you rush over and stabilize your friend and prevent them from dying? Or do you stop the villain from escaping and end all of this right here? That's a conflict. That's an inner turmoil. That's choice, decision. That is drama. One of the bandits is grabbing one of the player's NPC friends and is holding them as a human shield in front of them. You can take the shot and attack the bandit, but you risk hitting the hostage. Which do you choose? Even less dramatic things, too. Like, you're in a canyon where there's a very safe way around the long way to get to the enemy, or you can charge at them across this very rickety rope bridge. Risk and reward. One way is more risky and more dangerous, but it's faster. The other way is slower, but safer. These kind of things, these 2 sides that they can choose between, where both are appealing and they need to make that decision, are excellent to put into your game and try and infuse in there whenever you can think of to do it. These moments create wonderful drama and tension and interesting things for role-playing. And of course, if the players come up with an option C when you've only given them A and B, and it's a creative solution that gets the best of both worlds, wonderful. That means they're thinking creatively outside the box and have figured out a way to best this situation with their resources and teamwork and all these other things that you didn't plan for. Now you can be surprised and they can feel clever and succeed. Hooray. So again, description is very important, and make sure you have those important stakes that we talked about when it comes to preparing these. Make sure that there's something interesting happening. There's interesting things at stake here so that the players feel like they need to win. It's not just like, oh, we're wiping out a bunch of goblins. It's like, oh, we need to get to those people and rescue them before the goblins kill them. And, oh no, one of the goblins grabbed one of the kids and is running off. Do I chase after them, or do I help save everybody else? What do I do? Conflict. Now, running encounters is what happens after you have already planned the encounter, and now you're actually doing it. So, it's kind of impossible to perfectly plan anything, especially when there's a 1 to 20 random number generator called dice involved in everything they do in combat. So, two main questions come up. What if it ends up being too easy, and what if it ends up being too hard? What if it ends up being too easy is actually a non-issue. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about making it too much harder. Unless this is like their final boss, and oh no, something happened and now it's going to be way too easy. Then you might want to add some difficulty on the fly. But for the most part, any other encounter, let them have it. Let the players have their easy victory. Let them feel powerful. You have other encounters. Use this as a learning opportunity. Let the players have fun. And just, get them next time. Like, you planned it to be deadly, but they ended up making it easy. That's probably because either something went wrong with the planning, or the players made interesting creative uses of tactics, or the environment, or something that made that easier and made it a not fair fight, in which case your players are thinking and engaging things dynamically, which is what you want. They engage with the difficulty by circumventing it with better tactics. That's awesome. That's not something you want to avoid. That's something you want to encourage. That's great. Because what's more fun? An encounter ending up being super hard and taking 3 hours and the players just having to sit there and whittle through the numbers? Or it going much quicker than you anticipated because the players came up with something wacky and interesting and entertaining to watch? The second one. It was all about being creative and clever and using their abilities as opposed to just standing there and slogging away at this mountain of hit points. Encourage and reward creative solutions, and again, if it ends up being too easy, no one but you knows if it was supposed to be easy or hard, and unless it's apparent within the actual story, you don't need to be like, wow, that was supposed to be a lot harder, because you're letting the players see behind the curtain, and then they're starting to think in terms of meta-knowledge, and it's not about whether or not we defeated the bad guy, it's about whether or not we outsmarted the DM, and you don't want to encourage that kind of meta playing, unless you really do. But again, within the story, if it seems like the kind of thing where the players should know that what they just did was remarkable and they just succeeded against odds that should have been insurmountable, play it up in the story. Have people literally carrying the players on their shoulders and being like, oh my god, that was incredible. I've never seen anybody kill a dragon with a rock slide before, because they did something clever. Let them have fun, let them enjoy, let there be easy encounters. And again, plan, adjust, take notes, and learn for next time. Now, the difficult one here is, what if it's too hard? What if I'm about to kill my players and I don't want to do that? Well, if you watched my previous video on planning these encounters, hopefully this encounter should have both a win and lose condition, basically, and you've planned for both. And you know what to do if the players win. You also have planned for what happens if the players lose, and you can adjust that and make sure that the players losing doesn't mean the players die, it's a TPK, and the campaign ends. But let's suppose that you did not plan for that. Let's suppose that you did not plan ahead, and you're in a scenario where the enemies just want to kill the players, and it looks like they're going to succeed. You don't want that to happen. What do I do in this moment? How do I stop this? How do I keep this from turning into a total party kill when I don't want it to be? Well, it depends on how early in the encounter you notice this. If it's pretty early on, everyone's still up, if people are just starting to get lower in hit points, you can begin to engage in some suboptimal tactics, subtle things that you can play up the natures of the creatures, monsters, enemies, and show that it makes sense that they're making bad combat decisions tactically in a way that is not too heavy-handed and feels natural, but also benefits the players. Like, for example, the wolves have been really wailing on the wizard and the barbarian hasn't been getting attacked. Well, maybe now's the time that the wolves notice that the barbarian is the one carrying a giant sack of raw meat, and the wolves are going to all go attack the tank and damage sponge, which is a worse idea for them, but they're wolves, they're attracted to meat, it's okay. Suboptimal tactics make sense here. This is harder to do for intelligent creatures, but then you can use emotional reasons for things to happen, like if one of the players has a vendetta against somebody, or you killed their best friend and now they want to come after you, their best friend being bandit number 1 while this is bandit number 2. Their names might only be numbers, but let's give them some personality. Bandit number 2 now really wants to attack the fighter and is going to ignore everybody else, even to their detriment, because they're blinded by fury because their best friend just got killed. Another thing would be to clue into a weakness or something. Use description to point something out to the players they might not have noticed that could play with an advantage. If we're fighting something that is a huge-sized creature and we're in a dungeon and the hallway leading into here was a 5-foot wide doorway, point that out. Maybe as it passes, you just idly describe, oh yeah, and as the hulking beast passes by the passageway, you notice that thing could not possibly fit through that doorway. Light bulb moment, hopefully for players, that they can take advantage of that, get their unconscious friends into that doorway, the creature can't follow them, and then they can attack it with arrows or take a rest, escape, whatever they need to do, because they had an environmental advantage. Even maybe like they're fighting over a rushing river far below, and it looks like the river is deep enough that if you fell into it, you would get washed away safely, as opposed to getting dashed on the rocks. That's a way to escape. Another thing is, encourage escape. Show ways that they could get out of this, cut their losses, and run in a way that's viable, and you won't just have the enemies coming up and attacking them and, nipping at their heels as they're trying to run away, because you run into the same problem then. Generally, all of these are basically just trying to side with the players and rule in their favor on things and give them the benefit of the doubt, and all of these things that start to try and tip things in their favor. Now, there are some possible last resorts that we could throw in here, ones that you don't want to do very often, but it's okay if you do. They exist in every story. For example, a Deus Ex Machina. Some more powerful character or creature or friend happens to show up in the nick of time and either scare off the enemies or pick them up and help them escape and rescue them. Maybe a new ally or character can come in and save them. You generally want players to succeed on their own merit, but if they're all about to die, nothing wrong with bringing in a new friend to help them out. The eagles can fly in at the end of Return of the King and save the day, even if they haven't really been present for the whole time. It's okay. And, kind of very last resort that we don't like to talk about as DMs, but it's very useful at times. Fudging die rolls. Oh, would you look at that? They missed. I know the die says 20, but I've got a DM screen here that is about to save your life. If you really need to, you can fudge those die rolls and make it so that the enemies are missing, they're failing their saves more often, and the players just start having some good luck. It's not perfect, but if you really need them to succeed and live, and at least survive, you gotta do what you gotta do. And of course, choices are fun. You can also lean into this, and if you can come up with, sort of a deal with the devil here, you survive, you succeed, you don't die, but there's a cost. Maybe one of you can stay behind and valiantly sacrifice yourself, or an NPC that they're friends with will stay behind and valiantly sacrifice themselves, or maybe the warlock's patron is like, well, in exchange for future favors, I could get you out of this. Choices are always fun. If you can make it a choice, and the players can choose to take that extended hand in exchange for survival, this is a desperate circumstance, that'd be the time to do it. All of these are things you can do if the encounter ends up being too hard, but hopefully, when you planned the encounter to begin with, you plan for what happens if the players win and what happens if the players lose. Because if the enemies just need to get the MacGuffin, they're going to grab the artifact and they're just going to run with it. They're not necessarily going to stick around to kill the players. Even if the wizard goes down, they're probably not going to try and wipe everybody out. One little tip here at the end before I go. Try and avoid effects like sleep, stun, paralysis, unconscious, other than through damage, of course, but the things that remove a player from the fight. Because, there are things that have that, and it's a key element of some creatures, and sure, the thing can try and stun everybody as an action, but the thing is they remove players from the fight, and when you get to that player's turn, they can't do anything, and they're just kind of stuck, and it really just pulls them out of the game and makes them less engaged. They're just going to go, all right, whatever, and go on their phone. Because, they're out of the fight for the most part. Initiative feels like forever when you're a player for it to get around to the one little moment of spotlight where you can actually do things. And if you get that taken away from you, you're just sitting there waiting out the clock, watching the rounds go by until you can finally jump in and do something. And that does not feel good for players. So yes, they're present, but be responsible and try not to use them. If you want to try and come up with more interesting things that allow for the players to still have some action and choice, maybe adjust them a little bit, that will probably run better than having the player be unconscious or stunned and just missing turns, because that just takes away their ability to engage and have fun. That's just like, no, you don't get to play for a bit. So do your best to try and avoid these effects, or at least warn players ahead of time these effects might be happening and give them a way of avoiding it. Like if you know that this enemy uses a lot of paralyzing, let the players know, give them an opportunity to buy anti-paralysis, antitoxins, or at least even just antitoxins to give them advantage on their saving throws. Something to prevent it. Anything to prevent it, so you don't just end up with players twiddling their thumbs at the table and looking for distractions and excuses, because combat's really not that interesting to watch when you can't participate. Now, some of your players might be interested and want to root for their other fellow players and be perfectly content watching, but for the most part, you don't want to necessarily have to put someone in that situation. Alright folks, so hopefully these 2 episodes on planning encounters and now running encounters have been very helpful for you, and you feel ready to plan interesting, dynamic encounters that encourage movement and have interesting monsters and make good use of the action economy, and also now give good description and provide interesting stakes and keep the players engaged and energized and give them interesting decisions. And all of that good stuff to keep them engaged, energized, and feeling like they're having a really fun time. As always, come and watch us play D&D on Mimics and Monstrosities Twitch every single week. The VODs for the channel are right here on this YouTube channel, and you can go and take a look, as well as all of the previous episodes of Demystifying DMing. Also, come talk to us on our Discord if you want to ask me any questions, or tell me things you'd like to see in future videos, or just talk to us about D&D or anything else. Come on by, we would love to have you. And of course, remember, your players are having more fun than you think they are. Have a good rest of your day, everybody.